What is up, fellow Neopians? My name is Chili. Welcome back to my channel. Let me interrupt your Neopian-flavored, depression-fueled descent into the void for a moment. I've been trapped in a thought spiral for the last 16 hours. This idea starts with two kings, Skarl and Hagan. Two Skeiths, two kingdoms, ruling side by side as rivals. TNT told us that they're brothers. Just dropped it in once years ago like it was just some fun trivia fact. No context, no history, just a single sentence trying to explain away a political divide that makes no sense because it has no fucking depth. If they're brothers, where did they come from? I don't know about you, but I'm not placated by they're just like, oh, they're rivals. Obviously they're fucking rivals, but why are they rivals? So that got me thinking about the rest of Neopia. And all of them really seem to kind of have their own individual thing going on from a thematic basis. You have Shenku, which is very Eastern Asia inspired with the imperial courts and the high altitude temples and the cherry blossom aesthetic. You have the Lost Desert, which draws from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Morocco, which is sort of like Little Mermaid by way of high fantasy. And then there's like Meridel and Brightvale. And the two of them are different because they're the same. Their banners, their architecture, their fashion, it all seems to be pulled from the same sort of like dusty corner of medieval European history. They are two kingdoms that are so close in theme and in geographic location that they might as well just share a moat. It's easy to accept this as just another quirk of our little spaghetti-coated world. So, today we are going behind the pixels to re-examine two of Neopia's most familiar monarchs and maybe uncover the parts of the history that we were never meant to see. As usual, this video will be a mix between substantiated lore and a little bit of fanfic that I threw in there with just a little kind of spice of storytelling. You think you know these short kings, but I think that there's more than what's beneath the surface. We begin our story not with two kingdoms, but with one. And with two brothers, both angry, both bitter, and both absolutely convinced that the other one got the better half of the deal. I think there is a forgotten origin, an accidental cover-up, and a theory that is going to explain everything. This is Neopian Game of Thrones, Skarl and Hagan edition. Let's get into King Skarl of Meridel, the lord of munching, mirth, and mild belligerence. He's loud, he's greasy, and despite everything, somehow he's never been assassinated. Skarl rules from a throne that smells like neg farts and missed opportunities, yelling at passersby to tell him jokes while the economy quietly rots behind him. His style is less regal monarch and more Adam Sandler who accidentally inherited a trebuchet. The kind of angry short king energy that requests a full-time staff to keep the dip bottles and white monster energy drinks from taking over the decor of the palace. Skarl enters the timeline during the Battle for Meridel plot. He makes a decision that would forever change the destiny of two different kingdoms. He steals an orb. A very important orb. The Orb of Darrigan wasn't just this glowing MacGuffin, it was the backbone of Darrigan's prosperity and their literal lifeline for their entire civilization, all of their people. They just claimed it, like a bunch of colonizers that were out there picking wildflowers, and then they were surprised when Darrigan showed up at their front gates asking for it back. Skarl, instead of returning what was never his, chose national pride over peace, igniting a war that would drag both of the kingdoms nearly into ruin. The war spiraled into a second conflict, where Lord Cass seized control of Darrigan's citadel and allied himself with the Three, some ancient bad bitchy shadowy forces that nearly collapsed the region into absolute fucking ghetto rubble. All due to this self-righteous crusade. And through all of that, Skarl remains. Not smarter, not better because of his experiences, just like, still there. Because Neopia, for some reason, has quietly agreed to remember him as a hero and to forget how this whole thing started in the first place. By Skarl going out of his way to steal something that wasn't his, that an entire group of people relied on, It was so bad that it morphed our guy Darrigan from this jump-scary little fucking beast to what he is now today. And while it is a vast improvement, you can't go around stealing people's magical orbs, Skarl. That's negative aura points. Then we have Skarl's brother, King Hagan of Brightvale. Hagan is smug, methodical, and he is one passive-aggressive scroll away from imploding under the weight of his own ego. He's got big, my daddy drives an Aston Martin energy. His castle is filled with stained glass and unearned smugness, and his so-called wisdom system reads less like education and more like a standardized test that's designed by somebody who peaked in a philosophy subreddit. Really just an egg-headed little fuck. We get it, bro. You did one semester at Columbia. Knowing the root word for justice doesn't make you better than anybody else. When King Hagan is upset, he doesn't raise his voice in protest like his brother Carl. Did I just call him Carl? Like his brother Skarl. He drafts a 14-line dismissal in iambic pentameter, and then he shares it with his friends in their Cybertruck-themed subreddit, which is so locked down that I can't even get into it, which honestly kind of feels like a hate crime against comedy. Let me in, I just want to make fun of you bros! This isn't just sibling rivalry, this is something that seems way deeper and way older. Something that's been festering for years, centuries even. And eventually, nobody remembers where it started anymore. It's just kind of the way that we do things. The kind of resentment that calcifies over time until it becomes indistinguishable from tradition. That's just the way that it's always been. But what if it wasn't the way that it was meant to be? What if the real story, the one that's buried under decades of half-written lore and quiet retcons as Neopets changed hands and went between different companies, what if it didn't start with two kings ruling two kingdoms, but with a single throne, a fracture in time, and a forgotten past that turned something temporary into something eternal? Because once upon a time, there was no Meridale, and there was no Brightvale. There was only Meribright, and a monarch with two very difficult sons. Hagan and Skarl were not drafted into royalty, they were born into it. And not just royalty, shared royalty. They were raised side by side under one throne in a kingdom known as Meribright, and they fucking hated it. From the start, they fought over everything. Titles, tutors, who got the last turkey leg. It was constant, it was exhausting, and it was utterly unsustainable. At the center of it all was their mother, Queen Maghra. She ruled Meribright alone. No king, no consort. A Skeith of immense presence and terrifying precision. The kind of queen who could crush rebellions and budget deficits within the same afternoon and barely break a nail. She was wise, she was strategic, and she was patient, but not endlessly so. For years, she reminded her squabbling sons that one day they needed to learn how to compromise, that the crown belonged equally to both of them. But despite her constant calls for peace and silence, they never listened, and they never stopped fighting. The breaking point came, fittingly, over cheese. You see, Cheese Roller had always been a tradition for the brothers. It was a game that they invented together in their childhood when they were young princes, and that they played to amuse themselves and the peasants of the kingdom. This was a controlled outlet for their teenage chaos and angst, and it was a constant source of competition. There was an altercation between Skarl and Hagan in the castle. Definitely not a new situation. And Skarl, as he always did, challenged Hagan to a race in front of the court. He boasted, he blustered, he picked up the stinkiest, largest, most ridiculous cheese that he could find, and he declared that he would prove himself the rightful heir through raw, dairy-based performance. Hagan, calm and insufferable as ever, accepted the challenge with a smile that could curdle milk. He announced in front of the whole court that he would need to retrieve his preferred cheese wheel from its aging cave, and that they would race at dawn. Skarl didn't sleep that night. He paraded around the castle like he had already won, yelling about the sheer velocity of his lactose-based dominance over the kingdom. He even went as far as to petition the royal guard to clear out Hagan's library and burn it as soon as he won. But Hagan slept comfortably that night. He found a loophole, a technicality in the definition of natural rind formation. He didn't break the rules, you see. He just redefined them. He used them to reverse engineer a loophole and manufacture the perfect cheese wheel in the caverns below Meribright. All he had to do was wait for his impulsive brother to challenge him again, and believe me, he knew that it was not going to take long. His plan began to unfold at sunrise. Cheese Roller had become a local obsession in the years since the princes invented it, and today was no exception. The kingdom gathered on the grassy hill outside of Meribright Woods. Townsfolk lined the path, whispering bets and clutching cheese-shaped flags, many of them abandoning their potato fields to watch the spectacle. The libraries and churches were empty. Everyone was watching the contest. The course was simple in design, but brutal in execution. A steep decline that was riddled with bumps and divots and jutting stones. Your objective was to roll your cheese wheel from the top of the hill to the bottom as fast as possible, dodging every obstacle along the way. A clean run was very rare, and a perfect run was almost impossible. Even Queen Magra was interested in this commotion. She took her place on a raised platform, sketchbook in hand, expecting perhaps another childish squabble that she could document and then scold them about over lunch. She had no reason to believe that this time might be different. The contestants began to fill the stands, and the crowd erupted with cheers. The boys lined up on the line, and the contest began. Hagan's cheese wheel glided with frightening precision, angled just so, and weighted to perfection. It skimmed past every bump like it had memorized the course itself, until it finally hit a ramp that propelled it up into the air. Skarl sneered at Hagan, but his face quickly turned to horror as his cheese hit the first mound, ricocheted sideways, and cracked nearly in half. Hagan sneered at his brother as his own wheel hit the ground and bounced like a rubber ball, accelerating and arcing all the way to the finish line, where it landed with a satisfying thud. As it sailed through the air, Skarl watched in horror as the two halves of his cheese wheel slumped off of the path and into the brambles. It never even crossed the finish line. The silence that followed due to everyone's shock was deafening, and it was absolutely shattered by the scream that erupted from the angry prince. Skarl was beyond furious. He was humiliated. And in Marabright, trust me, that was far more dangerous. The fight that followed absolutely tore through the town. It destroyed several storefronts in Marabright Square, and it dragged half of the royal staff into early retirement due to injury. And when it was over, Queen Magra was livid. She threatened to ban cheese rolling from the community across the board. The royal court was even taking bets on what lucky farmer hand she was going to choose as her heir, because there was no way that she was going to allow these two numbskulls to continue living in the palace together. But before Magra could decide how to discipline her sons, Prince Hagan stepped forward. He was dressed in his courtly best. He approached his mother's throne and he looked her directly in the eye. He didn't apologize, and he didn't explain himself. He simply said, "The time has come for you to choose, mother." And then he laid out the facts. Plain and cold and methodical. They couldn't rule together, not without tearing the kingdom apart. And for the first time in their lives, Skarl agreed. And then he did something that stunned the entire court. He approached his brother, and he extended his hand to him, and Hagan took it. It was an agreement, an unspoken, rare, and sharp-edged promise. Magra's heart absolutely broke. The only two things in this world that she truly loved were now demanding that she picked one over the other. Queen Magra had ruled Marabright for decades, for centuries even. She was brilliant, she was strategic, she was ruthless when she had to be. And in this moment, she realized that she was about to lose one, or possibly both of her sons forever. She needed to move quickly and carefully. So she did the only thing that she could think to do. For the first time in her reign, Magra surrendered, and she compromised. She split the kingdom in half to Hagan and half to Skarl. Not as an inheritance and not as a reward, but as a lesson, maybe a punishment, maybe a test. She told them that it was their final chance to prove themselves worthy of being the one to receive the crown. In 100 years, Magra would call a town meeting. The loser would have to leave Marabright forever, and the winner would be crowned king of the lands. The princes had never been apart before, you see. They had never had a chance to live without each other, to test their mettle without being in each other's shadow. And with the eyes of the kingdom constantly upon them, they never really had time to reflect and learn from their mistakes. Magra believed that in time they would come to their senses, that she would watch the kingdom from afar and silently intervene if need be. And as the boys grew and they managed their own halves of Marabright, calling half Brightvale and half Meridal, she believed that once the pressure of ruling had set in, they'd finally understand the importance of family. They would come back to her like they always did. They would apologize, they would rebuild, and together they would fix what they had broken. It was supposed to be temporary, and it was supposed to be a lesson. But before they could learn from their mistakes, the Darkest Fairy's curse on Altador took hold. Marabright and Queen Magra's lesson was erased, and the course of history was forever changed. All that remains is two brothers with eerily similar kingdoms, trapped in a war that doesn't seem to have a start or an end. Okay, pause for a second, because before we go any further, we have finally reached the point of the video where I can tell you why I started making this video in the first place. It all comes down to this question that was stuck in my head that I could not stop thinking about. And the question is, King Skarl and King Hagan, who's your daddy? Bitch, who the fuck is your daddy? So I did what any Adderall-fueled and sleep-deprived Neopian would do. I started digging through the fucking archives. I went through every Neopedia article that I could find that mentioned Skarl and Hagan. I read every scrap of plotline. I even read into the PlayStation 2 game lore, looking for any clue that I could find. But we don't really have a lot of strong, positive female Skeith characters that existed around that time period that we know could be their mother. So it only makes sense that their mother was lost to history, right? But we have a lot of male Skeiths that fit the time period. I mean, Magra's not really their mom. I totally invented her, but I needed her to complete the equation because somebody had to be strong enough to rule this united kingdom somehow and survive raising these two chaos goblins until they could take their throne. So, who is their father? Who is your daddy and what does he do? This is where things start to get really interesting. There are several very real, very canon, very male Skeiths who absolutely fit the profile. So here's where the theory really kicks in. In Neopia, when you start digging into ancient royalty, especially fairyland adjacent legends, it's never spelled out, but it's always there in the background, right? When a monarch has no clear heirs, or when fate determines more than lineage can provide, the fairies are always who intervened. Queens who ask for the fairies' guidance, for legacy, for something beyond what the world could offer, blah, 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 blah. A ruler in need of an heir could make a pact. The reward is essentially this: a child born of magic, blood, and the ruler's deepest desire. That's the story that I think that Queen Magra stepped into. She didn't have time for courtship because she had to run Marabright herself. The deal that she struck with the fairies and the magic that she co-opted was supposed to give her one child, a single heir crafted by fairy power and shaped by her heart's truest desire. But Magra was an infinitely complex woman, and she had two loves in her heart. So instead of one heir, she was given two. They weren't twins, not exactly. Hagan appeared first, measured, disciplined, absolutely brilliant. That half of her heart was taken up by his father, Gordos, royal tax advisor, a stoic, methodical, and a man that was obsessed with balance. And you can definitely see Gordos in everything that Hagan does. He governs like he's solving a ledger. Next came Skarl, loud, temperamental, and chaotic. His father was Magra's first love, a childhood love, a boy by the name of Melkus File. Yes, that Melkus File. Neopia's most charming criminal, a con man with a definite crown complex. Skarl definitely didn't inherit his finesse, but he absolutely got his hunger for control. And other things. The dramatic flair, the tendency to escalate everything into a public scene. Magra was caught between two very different kinds of power, and Neopia was left with two rulers who reflected not just her legacy, but her regrets. Hagan and Skarl are mirrors of their fathers, and reminders of a queen who tried to make a perfect heir for her loyal subjects, and accidentally created a political time bomb for the ages. Meridell and Brightvale have been at odds for so long that it's hard to imagine a world where they're not, where one kingdom doesn't exist in constant opposition to the other. But if you strip away the theatrics, the cheese-rolling incident, the passive-aggressive scrolls, and the shouting matches disguised as diplomacy, what you find underneath is something quieter. Something more human than you would expect in Neopia. Something that looks a lot like grief. Both kingdoms are, at their core, missing something, whether they know it or not. They may not be able to put their finger on what they're missing, but there's no mistaking that tar pit-like feeling in your gut, that sort of sense of wrongness that clings to your ribs when you know that something is off. Some of us know this all too well because we carry this weight with ourselves in our everyday lives, going through the motions with a quiet gnawing sense that somewhere along the way, we veered off course. There is comfort in routine, but there's also a hollowness when you realize that it no longer fits who you are becoming. And in a world where all past transgressions have been forgotten, the emptiness is what seems to be fueling their endless feud. And what do they have to show for all of that at the end of the day? Meridell is strong, proud, and battle-tested. Its knights are brave, its farmers are hardworking, and its culture is deeply rooted in the grit of survival and tradition. But as the people of Meridel make that long walk to Skarl's castle to deliver his food that he demands constantly, the roads crumble underneath their feet. When they're injured in the fields, the hospitals are non-existent, and it's a very long walk to healing springs. Education is a luxury that few can afford. The common folk serve the crown with loyalty, but that loyalty is often repaid with neglect. Dreams are traded in for duties at a very young age, and hope becomes a hand-me-down that wears thin with time. The people of Meridel find joy in their simple lives, but they've been abandoned by the very system that they toil endlessly to support. On the other hand, Brightvale is brilliant. It's literate, it's wealthy. They walk cobbled streets lined with stained glass, each window a symbol of their refined taste and their relentless pursuit of status. But beneath the polish, something fundamental is missing from their lives. Brightvale has become a kingdom obsessed with achievement. Success is a birthright for the elite and a finish line that's just out of reach for everyone else. And with the worst possible outcome being banished to Meridel to count potatoes forever, from a young age, children are taught to perform, to achieve, and to win. Their accomplishments are impressive, sure, but they're also isolating. Empathy is seen as weakness, vulnerability is dismissed as a distraction, and in a place where everything is earned and nothing is shared with others, connection becomes so rare. Families speak in accolades, not in affections. People here are brilliant, but they are disconnected and they are burned out. They climb ever higher in the pursuit of meaning and validation, only to discover that the air gets thinner the closer that you get to the top. Because when you live your life for the approval of others without ever being seen for who you really are, even the highest honors that you achieve can start to feel like a hollow prize. Each kingdom has what the other one lacks. One has heart but no help. The other one has power, but it has no pulse. And in the end, it's the people, the farmers, the scribes, the shopkeepers, who suffer under the weight of their king's stubborn pride. Maybe that's why the curse feels so unbreakable, because to heal it would be to admit that something of value was lost. The love between two brothers, and that it was worth fighting for. That repairing it requires humility, not victory, not strength. But when the Darkest Fairy cast her spell, it didn't just wipe Altador from our memory. It reached even further. It took Marabright away from us. It took Magra away. Maybe she went to Shenku in search of a master who could teach her how to help her sons reconcile their relationship. Or that she had gone to the island of Yoyubal for a rare moment of rest. Wherever she went, the curse couldn't affect her directly, but it did erase her from history. It buried her legacy beneath 1,000 years of silence, and it scattered her memory across the winds. As far as we know, she could still be out there. A queen with no crown, a Skeith with no name. She could be anyone. But here's the thing about magic. It always leaves an impression. It did wipe our memories, but it didn't delete anything physical from our world. In the PlayStation 2 Darkest Fairy game and one of the books that you can read in the library, it references ruins of an old castle between Meridel and Brightvale. And I believe that somewhere in these runes, in the runes of Marabright, beneath the moss and the rubble, that there is a scroll that is long buried or a portrait that's half burned. I just imagine Magra's dusty old sketchbook fallen behind a table somewhere documenting the cheese roller incident. And it's just waiting. It's waiting for someone to break that spine and to knock the cobwebs loose from our collective memory. Because once the truth is uncovered, the curse will lift. And just like Altador, Neopia will remember Marabright again. They will remember Magra again. And maybe that's how this story ends. Not with a war, but with a whisper. With a quiet rediscovery and a spark that eventually turns into a blaze. Maybe it starts with another pair of brothers, another divided family, but this one with totally different energy. One socially awkward scholar that's dreaming of a better life, and the other one is a reluctant merchant. He hauls potatoes between their farm in Meridel and the stall in Brightvale where he sells them to try to earn tuition that's needed to send his brother to school there. And on one of their delivery runs, they meet up in the old ruins of a castle that lays between the two kingdoms, and they decide to go on an adventure deep in the archives. Just for fun. They stumble across a name, Magra. It's scribbled in the margin of a page that appears to be torn from a sketchbook. It depicts the two warring kings, Hagan and Skarl, as children, rolling cheese down the hill, like many of the peasants do today. That spark of curiosity leads them down a trail of rumors and buried stories. They spend weeks visiting these archives in between trips to sell potatoes and doing homework. They scour the old forgotten history tomes and stories of old until they find all of the pages of Magra's sketchbook. They put the story back together, and they begin to wonder, what if the past isn't what we remember? What if the future could be different? Maybe it unravels slowly, like one memory at a time, one truth at a time, until the shape of the past finally becomes something that you can hold in your hands as Magra's sketchbook. 2 kings, 1 legacy, and a kingdom that might at long last be ready to remember what it's like to live in peace. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Behind the Pixels. This has been a wonderful little conglomeration of actual lore and some shit that I just made up in my dumb fucking head, so I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm always looking for new ideas for videos, so feel free to let me know below what you think I should make next. Feel free to give me a comment down below, like, subscribe, do all the things, click all the buttons, you know your girl appreciates it. And until next time, it's fucking crazy out there, folks. Stay chilly, my friends. Bye!